Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today I'm talking to Peter Chaurier. Peter is with the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada, and he's a biologist, conservation biologist, and advocate. Today we are talking about pollinators, all the pollinators we have in Canada, and especially our wild pollinators and what you can do to support them. Hi, Peter. It's really good to see you.
Thanks, Tamara. Happy to be here.
Okay, so I just asked you this off before we started recording, but I thought you were working on your PhD, but now you're telling me you're done. You are a doctor. This is it.
This is it. Yeah, I'm a doctor, freshly minted. It's only been 2 months but very happy to finish.
Congratulations. So let's talk about that. You got your PhD in,
Biology.
and you are a conservation biologist
Yeah.
and an advocate. And you are with the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada. Now you're an outreach coordinator?
I am in charge of a couple different things, but assessment and outreach is one of them. And so I get to handle both the technical and scientific sides, and then also some of the outreach and science communication side. So it's a cool blending of worlds there.
And obviously, this is a huge passion of yours.
Yeah. Caring for the world, helping make sure we have such wonderful nature and spectacular plants and animals around for generations to come is a really big thing for me. And selfishly, I just want to see it all. And so it needs to last for me to be able to do that.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so if there's someone listening who's never heard of the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada, or they have no idea what a conservation biologist does, how would you describe it?
Yeah. So conservation biologists are the scientists that try to conserve nature. And so we study plants and animals and ecosystems, and wild landscapes. And we try to make sure that we can protect them and keep them around. And so we understand how they work. We try to understand what's happening to them, what people are doing to them, what things like climate change are doing to them. And we try to understand the solutions. So what we can do to keep these things around. So it's a very solutions oriented field and study. And Wildlife Conservation Society Canada is a group of really passionate conservation scientists that want to not only research what to do, but help put it into action as well.
If Canada, we pride ourselves on having, beautiful scenery and lots of land and mountains and water and beaches and everything. And it's just all so perfect. Is it perfect for, let's say our pollinators? Are we a perfect country for our pollinators?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, no place is perfect, and especially now, over the last couple of decades, human pressures from just kind of human expansion and industrial resource extraction are definitely fracturing these landscapes and a lot of these wildernesses that we have in Canada. And so animals like bees are not doing so hot in some places, especially in southern Ontario, the really populated places of Canada. Bees are not doing so well there anymore. Places where they used to be very common, really you would see them all the time and you would see lots and lots of different species. Now you're not seeing as many, and you're not seeing as many different species at all.
So is that because we're becoming too urban, or is it because they're not finding what they need in these urban areas?
A lot of it is, so it's a mix of different things, but one of them is the way that we destroy habitat. And so as we kind of expand as humans, as we, take up more land for agriculture, which we need, as we take up more land for houses that we need, we don't always do this in the most sustainable way. And so a lot of the wild habitats and landscapes are completely transformed from something that was pristine and perfect for pollinators, and we transform it into something that's completely new and really inhospitable. And there are ways to do that conversion, to convert places, wild landscapes into agriculture. There are ways to do this that are still sustainable and good for pollinators. But a lot of the times in the past, we haven't been doing that as much as we should. And we're kind of, we're creating spaces that are really good for humans and not good for anything else.
So I know that pollinators are your thing.
They're my jam,
and I love that, because we do hear about, we hear about, oh, the bees are, bees are in trouble and save the honeybees and save the bees. Um, and I think that, we understand that, not being an expert like you, to a certain degree, right? But I don't think we understand what it actually means if we don't have these key pollinators that we need.
Yeah.
So maybe you can describe, like, first, I have so many questions here. I want to know, like, can you explain the pollinators we have in Canada? I know it's a big area, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah,
some
yeah.
some of your favorites.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that. I'll be honest, even as a scientist, I don't appreciate pollinators all the time as much as I should. And I'm always learning new things and cool new species about them. So I'm always happy to share it. One of the most exciting things about pollinators, I think, is that, often we think of honeybees. They're the first pollinator that comes to mind. And they're so cool. I literally had honey in my breakfast this morning. And being able to visit a honeybee hive is such a cool experience to learn about these species and the really cool things that they do. But in Canada, this is a species that never would have been found here natively. Honeybees, the ones that we use in North America, are species that we took from Europe and brought over, with a lot of other things and people. And so this is a species that's completely new to the continent. And so what's really cool learning about pollinators is all of the native species that have been here forever, that our wild landscapes depend on. And so learning about them is really amazing. Bumblebees are some of my favorite wild pollinators. They are the really fat, really fuzzy, really thick bees that you'll see on summer days, just really loud, buzzing around. And they have those bands of colors, yellow and black, but sometimes orange and reds. And so they're really gorgeous animals. And in Canada, we're lucky to have a couple of different species of them. There are smaller bees as well. There are hundreds of bees. I should have started with that, but there are hundreds of different bees across Canada. And a lot of them are just these incredible shapes and sizes and colors. Really incredible.
I know those big bumblebees that you mean, that are just like kind of going up and down in the air. They're so big. Sometimes they don't look like they can fly properly. I love those ones too.
I call them the teddy bears of the sky because they're they're so fat, they're so fuzzy, and they're so gentle as well.
My kids will like that, the teddy bears of the sky. So do we have pollinators in Canada that are that are declining or, facing extinction?
We do, yeah. And bumblebees are unfortunately a good example of those. There was one species of bumblebee, the rusty patched bumblebee, which used to be super, super common in southern Ontario. And you would see it, you would go to a lot of places across southern Ontario, and it would be one of the most common species that you would find. And this was the case up until the 80s and before, and then in the last couple of decades, they've declined just really, really dramatically. They've just been disappearing from places where they used to be really common. And actually now we think that the species doesn't appear in Canada at all. And so it's actually one of the only presumed extinct bees in Canada. We can find it in the States in some places still, but it's a bee that's been absolutely decimated. And through a lot of the things that I mentioned before of human expansion, introduced diseases from things like honeybees and other insects that we manage and move around. And of course, climate change as well is a factor into that and those declines.
Remember when we were hearing, at least in BC, we were hearing about what are they, the murder hornets? No, what were they called? The murder something?
Yeah.
Anyways, it was scary. And I think there were some that were very close, like to where I am in Vancouver, right? Like they were just across the border, but bees don't know borders. So we were all like worried here. Are those bees pollinators also? Are all bees pollinators?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the murder hornets I think they were called Japanese.
Oh, yes.
Murder hornets, or
I can't remember, but it was scary. It was terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're huge. They're absolutely massive. Regular hornets are huge, and these species are even larger. And those are so kind of anomalous. Like it was a really big thing because they're so large and so, kind of terrifying if they fly at you. But that species is so rarely encountered that its effect on the larger ecosystem at the moment is pretty low. And so it's more often things like honeybees are a good example because we often move honeybee hives from coast to coast or, from one region to another. And when we do that, we can often move the parasites and the diseases that are in those honeybee hives along with them. And so that's something that those honeybees are in the ecosystem and environment a lot more than things like those murder hornets. And so it's the spread of disease and parasites from those honeybees that's sometimes a contributing factor to declines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so forgive me about my lack of knowledge on pollinators, but so I said to you, are all bees? I asked you if all bees are pollinators, and are bees the only pollinators?
Yeah.
Like,
Let me answer the
walk me through pollinators 101.
definitely. So are all bees pollinators? No, a lot of bees are pollinators. And when we think of honeybees, those are pollinators. Bumblebees are pollinators. There are little sweat bees and other small types of really cool bees that are pollinators. But there's a whole group of other bees that are a lot more like wasps in that they prey on other bee species or other insect species. And so they're parasitic, most of them, or they kind of steal their food and resources. And so it's this whole like Game of Thrones like lifestyle that these bees are living, which is really, really exciting. And similarly, bees are not the only pollinators by far. Flies and a lot of other insects are also really, really good pollinators. And then, of course, there are things like, birds, hummingbirds that are going to fly from flower to flower and contribute to pollination, butterflies as well, and a whole bunch of other weird animals. Bats in some parts of the world are good pollinators. I read a study that said that giraffes might be pollinators because they stick their tongues way up in those trees. And as they do that, their snout gets covered in pollen and then they move to another tree and pollinate because of that. But I don't know how much giraffes are pollinators, but they're certainly a lot more than just bees.
Wow. Okay, so we know that there's the one bee, the rust bee, right? That you said.
Rusty patch.
The rusty patch bee, no longer seen in southern Ontario. And was that a bee that was only seen in that area of Canada? Like, was it seen on the West Coast or no? Do we have bees here on the West Coast that they don't have on the East Coast?
Yeah, you do. There's a lot of cool bees that are just found in one part or the other of the country. On the West Coast, for example, there's Vosnesenski's bumblebee, which is not small, but is a bee on Vancouver Island that you really only find on Vancouver Island and a couple other parts of kind of lower kind of Vancouver area and elsewhere. And it's really cool because it's also called the yellow-faced bumblebee, and so its face is this really distinctive patch on its head, and so you can tell it like that. It's one of the easiest bumblebees to tell apart, and that's not one that we have on the East Coast. It's only kind of West Coast.
Now, you mentioned butterflies, and I find that interesting too, because I seem to think, and maybe it's my imagination, but I feel like when I was a kid, I saw way more butterflies than I feel like I never see them anymore. I never see butterflies. And I did think that those little yellow ones or the little white ones were butterflies until I looked them up, and they're not. They're moths. And so I was like, okay, well, there goes that idea. I wasn't seeing any butterflies. Do we have a decline in butterflies in this country?
Yeah, I think that's something that's hard to tell. Definitely some butterflies, things like monarchs, are declining across all of North America. And most species in general are declining, including butterflies, and moths. And there are definitely some places, I've seen some really dramatic photos from a researcher in Florida, so kind of other side of the continent from BC, but they have these really dramatic photos they used to go to research sites and they would put up these mist nets and you would leave them overnight and they're kind of attracted to that really white sheet and you put on a light on it. So you get all of these moths and nighttime insects that are attracted to those type of spaces. And then you can collect them all in the morning and you can tell what's what, how many things are there and what they are. And there are these really striking pictures of, they would take these photos in the 80s and in the 90s and then how they take them today. And the difference is night and day. You're going from a sheet that is, you can barely tell there's a white sheet underneath it because there's so many different moths and other insects. And nowadays it's, you're picking off, you can almost count them on your hand. So there's definitely a huge decline in insects largely. And this is really concerning when we're talking about moths and butterflies and bees and pollinators that support a lot of our food and
Yeah,
landscapes.
like I know that, and I want to talk to you in a bit about what we can do as individuals, but I'm wondering, like, um, it sounds like it's bigger than just an individual thing too, right? We need policies to protect um, our wildlife and our pollinators because we depend on them. People depend on, and I guess that maybe sometimes we're missing that sort of connection. They're not just butterflies aren't just wonderful to look at, or bumblebees aren't, just something, that kids go screaming from so they don't get a sting. These are very important. They're a very important part of how we all live. So can you maybe explain what are governments doing to support the work that you do?
Yeah. So research wise, we do get some funding to study these problems, and in a kind of more impactful and policy sense, there are some ways that the governments are supporting pollinators and kind of sustainable farming is a part of it because pesticides kill good bugs as well as bad ones if they're not used in a really targeted fashion. And so there are things governments are doing there at a more local level. A lot of it happens at the municipal level. We were talking about cities expanding and that causing declines in insects and removing habitat. And so some cities are doing a really great job at implementing really pollinator friendly strategies, and specifically thinking of pollinators in their policies. The city of Toronto has a great pollinator strategy that they implement, and other cities as well are really doing an awesome job of this. And that's really important because there are ways that we can do the things we need to do, whether it's agriculture, whether it's housing, in ways that are sustainable. And they help not only pollinators, but people too, right? Because green spaces are really important for mental health, for climate cooling as well in cities. And so the more that we implement these sort of sustainable strategies, it's not only helping the pollinators and those beautiful animals around us, it's not only helping them put the color on our plates from fruits and vegetables and things that they pollinate, but it's also helping us as people in terms of our mental and physical health and well-being within cities.
It's interesting that you said that. So I want to ask you something, and I'm gonna try really hard to not say the name of because I don't. It's more about. I went to a hardware store and we were having like tons of mosquitoes last summer. And so somebody said, "Oh, you can get one of those things and you can put it over here and it does something and then there will be no mosquitoes." Okay? That was a great description from me about that. I think you know what I'm talking about. So I got it home and it comes with these little pads and you have to put this thing on it. And I was looking and it's got all these warnings on it. I wear reading glasses because, and I didn't wear the reading glasses when I got it. I didn't read anything. So I opened up the directions and I started to put this together. And then I was like, oh, don't let it anywhere near you. Make sure it's this far away. Oh, don't let kids near it. Oh, be sure not to breathe any of this in. Oh, do this. Oh, do that. Oh, FYI, this will kill bumblebees. That's what it says right on the package. And I had no idea. I've never used it. So when I went back to that hardware store, and it's a big hardware store, I went back this year, and there is a massive wall of this brand and this type of mosquito killer that it appears to everybody. I actually stopped somebody from buying one the other day because when I saw it, because it says right on it, it kills bees. So I'm wondering, most people are like me. They have a problem, mosquitoes, they want to get rid of it. They go in, they buy it, they do it. We don't know, maybe they don't have their reading glasses on when they're, looking at the directions. Is that not a massive problem for what your work is, like what you're trying to do when we have hardware stores across this country loaded with this one product that actually kills bumblebees too, as a sidebar of killing the mosquitoes?
Yeah, it's a difficult situation, and it's on the one hand, using a mosquito repellent or a killer, for evenings on the patio and putting it out right away, that's probably not going to have a huge impact on bees and other insects. If you leave them out there, and there's, like you said, aisles and aisles dedicated to these sorts of pesticides and herbicides and bug repellents that are, if we don't use them carefully and don't really consider the good bugs as well as the bad bugs when we use them, then yeah, it does become a really big problem when we just kind of use these in a wanton fashion and without considering the broader impacts on ecosystems and pollinators. And there is as well a kind of huge kind of greenwashing and bee washing, even, where companies and industries are kind of using the goodwill of pollinators and pollination to push certain products and others, even though when you kind of go through the steps of those things, it doesn't quite make sense. There are a lot of examples of that with honeybees, for example, where, what we need to be doing if we want to protect pollination is protect wild pollinators. And so honeybees are, really important, and definitely for farmers that rely on those, they're really important species. But if we want to protect our broader ecological services and, the landscapes that depend on these and the fruits and vegetables that we don't use honeybees to pollinate, then we need to be thinking about wild pollinators, not just honeybees. And so there's a lot of interest in kind of redirecting all of that goodwill towards just general conservation and protecting the environment. And a lot of companies that are unfortunately taking advantage of that to funnel it towards honeybees and other products and, certain products that they're selling. So it is a problem for sure, but information is the solution to it.
Yeah, no kidding. And really, to be honest with you, Peter, I just wish that there had been a big sign there that said, oh, hey, by the way, because I think that, 99.999% of people don't want to kill bees. and so I think that there's a lot of innocence, right? When you you're just like, oh my gosh, the mosquitoes are crazy this summer. I'm going to get this thing. And, if it would have been information, as you said, is nice to have. I want to ask you what we can do as individuals to support our wild pollinators. But before we do that, I just want to mention that we always ask our guests to choose a Canadian nonprofit organization that we will give $500 to in your name for spending your time with us here. So you chose the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada. Shocking. I'm glad you chose them. And I wanted to let you know that we'll be giving them $500 in your name for the time that you've spent with us here. So thank you very much for choosing them and for all the work you do with them too.
Thank you so much. For those listening, I didn't have to choose them just because I worked.
No,
for them.
you didn't.
But I
love that you did.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love that you did. So let's talk about, the average Canadian and, that's listening to you, or I mean, actually this can be listened to anywhere. The average person listening going, okay, well, how do I attract these wild pollinators in my little urban yard? How do I do that? Do you have some tips?
Yeah, and only fun ones. And I think the best tip I would give, or one of the best tips to do something yourself, is building a pollinator garden or maintaining a pollinator garden. And this is something, I'll say it's a garden, but so you can do it in your backyard, you can do it on your front yard. If you have a balcony, you can put up a few plants there. Or if you have a community garden, you can be a part of that. And these community gardens or pollinator gardens where we foster or plant and raise kind of native wildflowers. So the same type of plants that would grow in the forest near you or in a natural meadow near you. Those types of pollinator gardens are really interesting because they're little pieces of habitat for pollinators potentially within a city. And so it's like this little island, right? If we look at a city and we see, bare monoculture lawns, and then we see like roads and houses, these little pollinator gardens are literally islands where pollinators can stop through as they move through these types of habitats. And so provide some food. If we leave these wild, so you can be really lazy with them, leave sticks, leave some of the leaves in the autumn, because those things are really great shelter as well for bees. They nest under them. They use them as nesting habitats, as overwintering habitats. When it gets colder in the fall, they actually hibernate, like they'll dig tunnels or take shelter under there and hibernate through the winter. And so those pollinator gardens are really great. They also help for climate change, helping shelter them from extreme events when it gets really hot or when it gets really dry. And so that's one really, really big and concrete way that you can help pollinators in city or your area or your neighborhood.
I think that it sometimes it feels just so daunting, and we think, oh well, if we're having this, this loss, right? Our biodiversity is like we're in trouble. What's my little garden patch going to do? But if we all did a little garden patch, and I like how you described it as islands too, because it reminds me of a hummingbird, right? That's what hummingbirds, when I watch them, they're just going from yard to yard to yard, and they stop in and they look and they check something out and they keep going, and and bees are the exact same and butterflies are the exact same. They're just really looking for the next island.
Yeah. And especially for bees where they're, doing these rotations every day, right? Hummingbirds as well. Like having that reliable spot that they can go to and visit, throughout a whole summer, throughout a whole season, that's really valuable. And if we all did it, it would make a huge difference for sure.
What happens if we don't support our wild pollinators? What happens if we keep going the way that we're going?
So when we talk about wild pollinators, what's really special about them is that it's not just one species in particular, it's whole communities of species. And all of these communities have really, have really particular relationships with the native plants across our country, with the landscapes across our country. And so by supporting these pollinators, we're supporting kind of the foundational pieces of all of these landscapes. If we just stuck to focusing on one or two species of pollinators, we would lose a lot of the rest of the ecosystems that depend on those communities of species. And additionally, there are a lot of plants, things like tomatoes, a lot of fruits and vegetables and nuts and berries that are only pollinated by wild pollinators. So things like blueberries, tomatoes is a great example, where it's really difficult to have these be pollinated by things like honeybees. You really need to have, either big fat bumblebees or you need some wild bees to be able to pollinate these. And so without those wild pollinators, we'll lose out on a lot of those fruits and vegetables that are pollinated by wild pollinators, and all of the wild landscapes, the forests, the meadows, the woodlands, all of these places that we drive by or that we go out to visit and recreate in, we're losing those foundational pieces to hold those together.
One of the things that I've noticed, I'd say since the pandemic, is a lot of more people gardening, a lot of people getting into their, yards or their community gardens or, their balconies, like really getting into whatever space they have for flowers or food or whatever it might be. So I feel positive about that. Like there's all these little islands like you're talking about. There could be more, obviously. But one of the other things I noticed is a lot of gardeners on social media are now talking about, climate change and supporting our pollinators like you're talking about. And one of the things that keeps coming up, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to guess that you know something about peat moss, right? Like, so because I guess it's bad. So I didn't know that, right? Because a lot of gardeners use peat in their, not peat, but peat, P-E-A-T, in their, gardening or their seeds and stuff like that. But these come from bogs, right? And so what we're doing is we're going in and we're taking things again out of these really important areas for our wildlife. And I think we do that a lot as humans, don't we?
Yeah, I think we're really good at finding something that we like and taking it out of a place and not realizing that when we remove it, there are a whole bunch of knock-on effects that has. Peat is a great example, and Wildlife Conservation Society actually does a lot of work in peatlands and looking at how important these places are for communities, for ecosystems, and also for carbon storage. Like you mentioned, peatlands are really great stores of carbon dioxide and of greenhouse gases. And so when we remove them, we're not only destabilizing that whole ecosystem, but we're also removing a really large part of carbon that was stored and locked away. And we're using it for our garden where it's going to break down and get released a lot quicker.
Yeah, I had no idea. It just goes to show once you start getting into something like people have with gardening, right? Then you start to go, wait a minute. Oh, I can make a difference with the pollinators, like you said, and I can support the hummingbirds and I can support but then you look a little bit bigger and you're like, I see. Because I think sometimes too, Peter, we go into our hardware stores or to our garden centers, and we think that everything in there is for the good. And it's not always, right? We really do have to, I guess, be educated on what it is that we're putting into our own gardens.
Yeah, but I do agree, and I love what you said, that I think the important thing is that nobody really wants to kill bees, right? Like once you know that, once you learn these things, people usually make a difference, and it might be a small difference, but when a lot of people make it over and over again, it adds up. And that's one of the things that gives me a lot of hope in conservation, where a lot of the time we're talking about doom and gloom, is that whenever we talk about bees or we talk about what we can do, people get so excited about that. And I think it's really important to hold on to that and highlight that.
I do too. And I think that, when we start kids young too, right? When we start young, worried about our pollinators and who they are and why we need them. And like you said, there's so many different kinds too. And okay, my one last question for you. Mason bees. So we always see that you can get these mason bee houses and put them in your yard. And are mason bees also good for our gardens? Is that something we should do? Because you can do it. You can actually order mason bees and they'll send them to you.
Yeah, that's really cool. And mason bees are really great for your garden. They're really important pollinators as well. But the thing is, probably the best thing to do if you want mason bees is just to culture your garden, like foster your garden, and plant those native wildflowers. Leave it messy so that there are places for these bees to nest. That's the best thing you can do. The beehives that you can order are sometimes really effective, but a lot of the time they harbor things that prey on bees. And so things like wasps use those houses too. If you don't clean them out and maintain them, they can foster a lot of disease and parasites as well. And so the best thing to do, and the lowest effort thing to do, is just keep your garden and add a little extra plot instead of getting bee houses.
I love it. Amazing. Peter, I really appreciate this conversation because, we need to remember why we have our gardens and who we share them with and the critters that we can support in our own little islands in our garden. Okay, your website is Peter Shorye, which is Peter, and then SOROYE.com. And you can also follow Peter on Twitter at Peter Shorye. That's SOROYE. And are you active on Instagram? Do you want to talk about your Instagram too?
Yeah, follow me on Instagram at Puffy Pete. The handle's
Puffy
from
Pete.
when I had a lot more hair, but
yeah. I found Peter on Instagram. He's at Puffy Pete on Instagram also. Peter, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you're doing. And again, congratulations on your PhD.
Thank you, Tamara. It was a pleasure to be here. It was really great talking to you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.